is white, all ready to harvest. Therefore, whosoever will thrust in his sickle and reap, the same is called of God. The church is admonished again that joint responsibility is laid on all. Properly and equally borne, this responsibility will ensure success. The consummation will be glorious, and all will share in that glory. Saints and friends, the President of the Church, W. Wallace Smith.
I come to talk with you about the church. The field is white, all ready to harvest. This is true in every generation. The church is called to carry the gospel of Jesus Christ to every creature. God has chosen us and matched us against the demands of this day. From the office of the presidency, it is thrilling to see the work of the church unfold around the world. This is more than a matter of casual interest to you and me, for the calling which binds us together under God is our very life. Nothing else can ever be so important. This is the center place. As I speak from here, I am deeply conscious of the feverish complexity of our times. This is a growing metropolis with problems of city planning, transportation, expanding utilities, bulging educational systems, and impending industrial developments. This is the nerve center of the church. Through the years, the saints have looked toward it as the hub of Zion. Great changes have come in this community since my grandfather and the early church pioneers set this ground apart for the gathering. We read the history of those early pioneer days with some sense of awe at the magnitude of the problems faced and the sacrifices made by the early saints. In those days, the church was small and its objectives seemed clear. The tempo of the church today, however, confronts us with such a variety of problems which are so interrelated and complex as to go beyond the imagination of the early church pioneers. The growing church in such a rapidly changing world is faced with strains and demands which shall be as important to our times as was the clear call of the early church in 1830. We must ever reevaluate our work to keep it centered in the call of Christ to each new generation. In spite of the contrast between 1830 and 1962, the needs of men are eternal, and the central task of the church is unchanged. It's important that we not allow either the chaos or the complexity of our times to cloud our objectives. The progress of our day does not make the need for the gospel of Jesus Christ any less. Indeed, it becomes increasingly essential that men who control the powers which science makes available shall be guided by the Holy Spirit. The progress of the church must always be evaluated in terms of winning the hearts and minds of men to Christ. Methods may change, but the central task is not altered. In recent years, the completion of the auditorium has been one of the major emphases of the church. It has stood as a symbol of our unity and strength. Saints from all over the world have looked to the auditorium as a kind of living, vibrating heart of the church. Here we have joined from many lands in world conferences. Here decisions are made by the councils of the church, and leadership is given which affects us all. It stands today because of the prayers and contributions of saints from around the world. The whole church rejoiced when we dedicated the auditorium free from debt on April 1, 1962. Visitors and delegates to the World Conference joined in praise and adoration to God in a beautiful dedication service. But this was only a small fraction of the many hearts that have thanked God for this day. Visitors now learn of the church through this great structure with its fine organ, its church offices, dining room and worship facilities. Daily guide service provides tours for those who come to see and information about the church for the interested. The recording made by the Messiah Choir preceding each Christmas season is one of the many activities conducted in the auditorium. This building is used for conferences, institutes, and many cultural activities. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and the recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised. Jesus read these words from Isaiah as he announced his mission to the world. He declared his concern for the whole person. The Church of Jesus Christ must gird itself to continue his work. Its institutions are a tangible means through which this ministry to the total personality of man is expressed. Through them, the church ministers to the physical, educational, and social needs of people. At the Independent Sanitarium and Hospital, under the hands of men who are both skilled in medicine and ordained servants of God, the church cares for the ill. Last year, approximately 9,000 adult patients were admitted. Many of these received a ministry which directed them toward the way of Christ at times when they were most able to understand. At Rest Haven, the aged are cared for, not only physically, but spiritually through the ministry provided. Here, those who rejoice in the common faith of the Restoration share their fellowship and receive the care which they need in the golden years of their lives. This building was completed in 1956 and paid for from the oblation funds of the church. It accommodates approximately 80 elderly saints. It's a touching tribute to hear visitors say, "I'd like this to be my home someday." Here, the presiding bishopric is seen looking over plans for building other homes for the elderly in centers of church population in the domestic field and abroad. Plans for such a home are already well advanced in Australia. The needy receive help from the Social Service Center. Thousands of hours are spent each year by devoted saints who prepare clothing, furniture, and other items which are given to the needy or sold for such a reasonable price that those with limited incomes can afford the necessities which they secure here. Grayson College is one of our most rapidly growing institutions. Its contribution to the church in developing leadership is immeasurable. In the last decade, Graceland has grown from an enrollment of approximately 600 until it now enrolls over 900 students. This past decade has seen the completion of the Science Building, Temple Hall, Tess Morgan Hall, the McDowell Commons, the new athletic field, as well as major addition to the Student Center building. Through the years, young people from small congregations and large have come to this community where they have shared together in learning by study and by faith. From the School of the Restoration, our priesthood and lay leaders go forth to minister to the church. This school was approved by the General Conference of 1956. Since that time, it has grown in its ministry through home study as well as through extension and residence classes. There's a branch of the school in Australia. In the summer of 1962, the School of the Restoration inaugurated a more comprehensive program for the education of our appointees. It's anticipated that the years ahead will see this institution making a rapid growth in its contribution to the church. From the Independent Sanitarium and Hospital School of Nursing, our nurses go forth as ministers of health and mercy. 709 nurses have graduated from this institution. Wherever they go, the church is known and ministry is given, not only through nursing skill, but through the Spirit of Christ which young women find in training here. The Herald House is the oldest of our institutions. From the very earliest day of the Restoration, we have considered our facilities for publishing the literature of the church to be of primary importance. The publication and distribution of the Scriptures in many languages commanded our attention from the beginning. Other materials are constantly being written for worship, study, and the proclaiming of the gospel to the world. Apostle Heald, with his many helpers in translating our literature into other languages, and the departments which produce materials for the church, work closely with the Herald House. Through this institution, the church receives much to help carry forward its mission. The gathering of the saints into the central areas moves forward. This makes possible larger gatherings for fellowship and worship, such as the campus meetings held each Sunday night during the summer in Center Stake. These are held out of doors, where at times more than 3,000 saints gather to receive ministry. Approximately 25,300 saints live in the central stakes. Over 12,000 of these live in the Center Stake alone. Now we look toward dividing and reorganizing the Center Stake. This is a mark of the growth being made through the gathering of the saints into the regions designated for this purpose. There is need for skilled laborers in the building of Zion. While these needs are not fully met, the strength of our membership and the skills of devoted saints are making a notable impact in the central areas. We are encouraged by the development of the central areas of the church and of its institutions. But this is only the hub from which the church stretches in all directions around the earth. It's important that the center be strong, but it is quite as important that the church grow in every branch and congregation the world around. An average of one new church or major addition is completed every 8 days. This is continually giving us better facilities for worship and ministry in the branches and congregations throughout the world. Here you see the new church in Papeete, Tahiti. This is but one of many new buildings, both in the domestic field and in missions abroad, where our people have sacrificed in order to provide facilities adequate for giving ministry in their communities. The church pioneered in family camps. The saints were able to join together to receive ministry from church leaders and to enjoy the fellowship of others who shared their goals and their dreams of Zion. Last year, we held 66 reunions and 91 youth camps. For us, this represents a tremendous source of spiritual strength. In its deeper sense, the facilities of this growing church have been made possible by the devotion, planning, and sacrifice of the saints over many decades, and by the blessing of God. We have grown rapidly in the past 20 years. The increase of our church buildings, institutions, and facilities, our growing number of appointees, our outreach into new areas abroad indicate the great response of our people through the years immediately behind us. Still, the needs of our day are staggering. More is being demanded of the church each year. Our pride in the achievements of the past should never blind us to the great responsibility of the future. It's imperative that new members be drawn into the fellowship of the church, and inactive members be re-enlisted as laborers for Christ. Present studies made by the presiding bishopric show that the minimum immediate needs of our institutions confront us with the following expenditures. Grayson College Library, $500,000. Grayson College dormitories, $525,000. School of Nursing dormitories and chapel, $450,000. Independent Sanitarium and Hospital, $750,000. Rest Haven expansion, $300,000. Homes for the aged other than independents, $300,000. Herald House, $500,000, totaling $3,325,000. The World Conference of 1962 approved the addition of $350,000 to be used for the Houses of Worship Revolving Fund loans. In the very near future, we shall need to add at least an additional $500,000 to this fund to meet the continually increasing requests of our branches and missions. The requests for loans in 1962 have greatly increased over any preceding year. Beyond this, we have great need for student center buildings on some campuses where we have large numbers of young people attending college. Minimum estimates show that we shall need at least $250,000 to begin meeting these student center needs. Under the program adopted in the days when we were first free from debt, an operating reserve fund was established which was intended to provide enough money to operate the church for one full year, if financial reverses should overtake us. We now have in that fund $1,266,000. But the needs of the church have grown so rapidly that this is no longer enough to operate the church for 1 year. The present amount in the operating reserve would meet our costs for only 5 to 6 months. We must add $1 million to the operating reserve fund as quickly as possible. To recapitulate, the minimum needs for capital expenditures in the near future are church institutions, $3,325,000. Houses of Worship Revolving Fund and student centers, $750,000. Operating reserve, $1 million, making a total for capital improvements, $5,075,000. Now, besides the needs for capital expenditures, we have a growing operating budget. At the last conference, we approved an operating budget of approximately $2,800,000 per year. When we consider the great need for various capital expenditures, as well as the continuous demand of our operating budget, we can well understand the necessity for each of us to accept seriously the responsibility of his stewardship. The needs listed above are the very minimum needs for our internal growth. There are continuing needs in our present missions abroad. We are handicapped by a shortage of manpower and physical facilities. This doesn't mean that we have done poorly. Here you see our church headquarters building in Holland. Since 1952, we have completed headquarters buildings in Holland, Germany, Australia, Japan, French Polynesia, and Okinawa. Our church in Korea is under construction. Funds are being raised for a headquarters building in England. The Ralph Ferret family is one of 4 families newly assigned abroad at the last World Conference. In the last few years, we have greatly increased the number of appointee families in our missions abroad and intend to continue this buildup of manpower. The local leadership abroad is steadily growing. It's heart-rending, however, to consider the areas which are now ripe for missionary endeavor only to turn away because we lack the necessary resources to expand any further. Here are the countries in the world where the church has not been established. This presents us with a great challenge. We have only begun to carry the gospel to the world. The part of the world where the church has not officially been established is much greater than the part where it has. Even in those areas where the church is represented, only a small fraction of the people have ever heard the gospel. The job before us appears to be staggering. Yet we do have resources for the task. God has placed within our hands power to do the job. In times past, we have spoken apologetically of the unpaid tithes, the low percentage of tithing statement filers, and the many who make no contribution in tithes or offerings to the world church. Let us not be overly discouraged about this. Actually, these are among the untapped resources which give us the assurance that the needs of the church can be met. We have the strength if we will but follow the principles of good stewardship. The presiding bishopric tells us that a conservative estimate of the unpaid tithe reported on the tithing statements filed with them is $6 million. This is more than enough to balance the immediate capital expenditures that we have noted. We cannot overlook the challenge of Malachi, who said, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouses, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts." At the present time, 20 1/10% of our church membership have committed themselves to the financial law by the filing of an annual tithing statement. The task before us requires great devotion on the part of all our people. 1/5 cannot do the job alone. We have great faith in the saints, and we do not believe the church wants a few to carry the responsibility alone. As the whole church unites in fuller stewardship accounting, great power is available to us. The days ahead demand that we must critically evaluate the expenditures which determine our standard of living. Present information from tithing statements show that approximately 2.5% of the net income of families filing is given to the support of the general church. However, this percentage remains nearly constant for both our low-income families and the families with high income. It appears that the social expectation of our times leads many to a standard of living which is above our just wants, when these are related to the call of Christ in our lives. Sacrificial stewardship in this regard will strengthen our families and bring greater strength to the church. We need well-educated, devoted men and women to assume places of responsibility. This is true in every branch and congregation, in missions abroad, in the center place, and in our institutions. We are not daunted by this, however. Increasing numbers of highly trained and capable church members have come to offer their services in those places of most value to the church. We need to worship deeply and to find a new devotion to Christ and the fellowship of the church. Our calling is great and demands unswerving allegiance. The church is charged with establishing the faith among the people of each generation. The needless poverty, hunger, and chaos in the world rends the hearts of godly men. The uncertainty of our times is so great, and the conflicting philosophies so alluring, that truly the very elect shall be deceived unless the church maintains a sound faith and devotional life. The Council of 12 are working diligently to mobilize and direct the missionary resources of the church. World Mission Week is part of a wider missionary emphasis which has been growing under the ministry and planning of these men. The 70 make up the solid core of missionaries in opening up the work of the church in every land. They also give support to weaker branches and missions in the organized field. Our missionary effectiveness in winning men and women to Christ is growing. The church must expand in numbers as well as in sound faith. The great demands of these days require that the army of the Lord must be strong for the world's sake. We have many resources for our task. Prayer is perhaps the most important of these. Tennyson was correct when he penned these lines, "More things are wrought by prayer than this world dreams of." An effectual prayer life is a source of spiritual power, enabling us to do the work of Christ. Without this, we are weak. The Scriptures are tools to be used. These are like the memory of the church. Through these, we share the experience of the church through the centuries and are united with the people of God in all ages. The Scriptures provide a source of spiritual strength. They guide us on our way, and they provide us the means for touching the lives of men and women whom we seek to win to Christ. Regular study of the Scriptures is important in our effective service to God. The heritage of the church is a great resource. We are proud of our history. The heroes of the past inspire us. The great events and developments in the church become the means for reaching out to others that they also may be adopted into the kingdom of God. The church itself provides a means through which we may reach out to minister to men and women in need. Its program of worship, its ordinances, and the preaching services all provide a great opportunity for our own development. The departmental activities of the women, young people, and church school offer great benefits to us and our families. These open the way for us to introduce our friends to the church and offer them the ministry which the church can provide. God has been good to us. The church offers us the opportunity to express our love and service to God. It surrounds us with the fellowship of those committed to Him. When the saints meet together, we rejoice. In this spirit, the World Conference sings. The Spirit of God, like the fire, is burning. The laughter and glory begins to come forth. At the last conference, 240 appointees with their families were assigned. Those present and over 5,000 priesthood, delegates and visitors to the conference stood to dedicate themselves to the unfinished task before us. These men and women from nations around the world went forth from the conference committed and dedicated to witnessing for Christ and building the kingdom. Across the land, there were thousands of others who could not attend the conference, whose hearts were turned to the needs of the church. They also were among the committed. I challenge you who have heard this report to move ahead as you never have before in winning your neighbors to Christ. By your tithes and offerings, send others where you cannot go. In all this service, remember to preserve your own families to Christ. Every one of us has been called to be a co-worker in this task. The church is admonished again that joint responsibility is laid on all. Properly and equally borne, this responsibility will ensure success. The consummation will be glorious, and all will share in that glory. The scriptural message to this generation is still, "Behold, the field is white already to harvest. Therefore, whosoever will thrust in his sickle and reap, the same is called of God."